Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into this week's edition of my top starts and sits for week 9 of this NFL season. As you guys know the drill, going to get my top 2 starts and sits at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. And I do like to remind people, I personally do this. I'm not, you guys can do this if you wish, but I always factor in these starts and sits when I put together my daily lineups on the weekends, as well as if I'm going to bet the over or unders on some of these players. So with that being said, I'm going to start at quarterback like I always do. My top starts of the week. First of all, I can't believe I'm actually going to have to suggest this, but that is just how the season has gone for the Super Bowl winning quarterback in Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes. But I love him to have a ceiling type of performance this week. Patrick Mahomes against the Buccaneers defense. The Bucs have allowed the most points per game against quarterbacks this season. Over their last 4 games, all 4 quarterbacks they face have thrown for at least 240 passing yards. And then in those 4 games, they've allowed 14 passing touchdowns. I know managers of Mahomes have been very disappointed in most of his game outcomes, but I'm looking for this to be a classic ceiling performance out of Mahomes on Monday night. My top start of the week, he was also my quarterback waiver wire target of the week. Maybe he might be out there in your waivers if you guys are looking to stream a quarterback, but I definitely do love Bo Nix against the Ravens this week. The Ravens have allowed the 3rd most points per game against the quarterback position this season. And then in their last 4 games, all 4 quarterbacks that they have faced have thrown for at least 265 passing yards. And in those 14 games, they have allowed 13 passing touchdowns. Bo Nix is coming off that game where he threw for 3 touchdowns, so I'm looking for him to get at least 2 touchdowns in this outcome and get you those yards in a potential very shootout type of performance. Even though Denver does have a pretty good defense, I could see this being a high-scoring game between both teams. My top sits of the week, I am going to go with Tua Tagovailoa against the Bills. The Bills have allowed the 5th fewest points per game against the quarterback position. Tua also hasn't had great production outcome against Buffalo throughout his career. He's faced Buffalo 7 times, and in those 7 games, there's only 1 game where he finished with 2 passing touchdowns. Now, over their last 4 games, they have allowed 2 different quarterbacks to throw over 215 passing yards. That was C.J. Stroud and Aaron Rodgers. So that might be a little of a silver lining if you did wanted to play Tua, is that he might be able to get you the yards, but the thing is, like I said, he struggled to get throw touchdowns against this defense, and this defense in their last 4 games have only given up 4 passing touchdowns. My other sit of the week, you might be wanting to, this might be a streaming option you're thinking about because of what he did against that Ravens defense, which I already told you about. They've been struggling against quarterbacks this year. But Jameis Winston against the Chargers, I would hesitate to stream him in week 9. This Chargers defense, they've allowed the 7th fewest points per game against quarterbacks this year. Now, in their last 4 games, they have allowed Patrick Mahomes and Bo Nix to throw over 250 passing yards. So if you stream Jameis, kind of like Tua, he might be able to get you the yardage, but I don't know if he's going to get you a lot of touchdowns on Sunday. Just like the Bills defense, they've only given up 4 passing touchdowns in their last 4 games. So yeah, if you were thinking about streaming Jameis, I would maybe turn to a Bo Nix or a different option in week 9. Moving into my top starts and sits at the running back position. My top start of the week, he's kind of gotten quiet since the beginning part of the season when he was blowing up, but I'm looking for Alvin Kamara to have a ceiling type of performance against the Panthers. The Panthers have allowed the most points per game against the running back position. In Alvin Kamara's career, against the Panthers, he averages 87.2 total yards per game against them. And then in their last 4 games, Carolina has allowed 3 different running backs to finish over 100 total yards against their defense. And they have given up 8 running back touchdowns in their last 4 games. It sounds like Derek Carr is going to be back in the lineup too for the Saints. So I view that as a bonus where we're going to see a ceiling type of performance out of Kamara on Sunday. My other top start, I do like Tony Pollard against the Patriots. The Patriots have allowed the 3rd most points per game against running backs this season. And their last 4 games, they've allowed 6 different running backs to finish over at least 75 plus total yards in the last against the Patriots. And then in their last 4 games, they've given up 6 running back touchdowns. So I definitely like Tony Pollard as a strong RB2 in your lineups in week 9. My top sits of the week. I am going to go with Bucky Irving and Rashad White against the Chiefs. Obviously, you don't never really love a backfield that is splitting touches against a tough run defense. As far as Kansas City, they're allowing the fewest points per game against running backs this year. In their last 4 games, the most rushing yards they have allowed to one running back was Jordan Mason. He got 58 rushing yards against them. And then in their last 4 games, they have not allowed a running back to score a touchdown against them. So you factor in how good the Chiefs' running defense is this season, then you're talking about a split backfield. I would be turning to other options than Bucky Irving and Rashad White in Week 9. My other sits, I'm going to go with Tank Bixby and Travis Etienne Jr. Doug Peterson came out this week that they're expecting Travis Etienne Jr. to return this week. So I think that obviously hurts Bixby's value as a fantasy running back. And then you factor in that, and then I really don't like to play running backs off an injury if you're an Etienne Jr. manager. But the fact that they're probably going to split reps, they also have a tough matchup against Philadelphia. Philadelphia is allowing the 4th fewest points per game against running backs this season. In their last 4 games, they have the most rushing yards they have allowed to a single running back. Happens to be the guys I just talked about. 49 yards to Bucky Irving and Rashad White, which is like 98 yards total rushing. But at the end of the day, those guys split touches, which I've been saying. Don't really love the fact that these guys are going to be splitting touches, and they only got to 49 rushing yards. And then in the last 4 games, they've only given up 2 running back touchdowns. So I do feel like both of these top sits, if you're going to play one of these 4 players, it's a touchdown or bust performance, I feel like, in Week 9. Moving into my top starts and sits for the wide receiver position. My top start of the week, feeding off my Bo Nix start. I like his top wide receiver, Courtland Sutton, against the Ravens this week. The Ravens have allowed the most points per game against wide receivers this year. In their last 4 games, they've allowed 4 different wide receivers to finish with at least 80 receiving yards. And they have given up 9 wide receiver touchdowns in their last 4 games. He is the top option in that passing attack for Denver. So if I love Bo Nix, you know I'm going to love his top target in his offense. The other top starts, I like the trio for the Colts this week. Josh Downs, Michael Pittman Jr., and Alec Pierce against the Vikings. And obviously there's a benefit with which should be more of a consistent passing attack with Joe Flacco. But I think I would even like these 3 if Anthony Richardson was playing on Sunday night. This matchup against the Vikings defense, they're allowing the 2nd most points per game against wide receivers this year. In their last 4 games, they've allowed 5 different wide receivers to finish with at least 75 receiving yards. And then they've given up 10 wide receiver touchdowns in their last 4 games. So I love Downs. I think he's going to be peppered with targets. I'm looking for Pittman to have a ceiling type of performance. And obviously Alec Pierce is a boom or bust wide receiver this year in fantasy. But with this matchup, you can see a boom type of ceiling performance out of him. I could see all 3 guys eating on Sunday night with Joe Flacco in the lineup. My top sits of the week. I'm going to go with Zay Flowers against the Broncos. Obviously, you guys know by now, Deontay Johnson got traded to Baltimore. I don't expect Deontay to play. If he does suit up on Sunday, I don't expect him to play a lot of reps. I'm not really factoring that in. It's just because Zay has a tough matchup against this Denver defense. Denver is allowing the fewest points per game against the wide receiver position. In their last 4 games, only 1 wide receiver finished over 75 receiving yards against them, and that was Jalen Coker, the rookie wide receiver for Carolina, and they've only given up 3 wide receiver touchdowns in their last 4 games. So he has a tough matchup. He might be lining up against Patrick Surtain at times in this matchup. So if you have a better option to have in your lineups this week other than Zay, I would definitely consider it. My other sits, I'm going to go with the trio of wide receivers up in Buffalo. Amari Cooper, Khalil Shakir, and Keon Coleman against the Dolphins defense. The Dolphins have allowed the 2nd fewest points per game against wide receivers this year. In their last 4 games, only 1 wide receiver finished over 65 receiving yards, and that was Marvin Harrison Jr. over this past week. So if you play one of those 3, you're going to have to hope that at least one, if you play them, that they at least get over the 65 receiving yards. And then they have only allowed 2 wide receiver touchdowns in their last 4 games. So I feel like if you put Cooper or Shakir or Coleman, it's going to be like a touchdown or bust opportunity for them. Maybe Shakir can get you those receptions in PPR leagues. But if you have better options to consider in Week 9, I would definitely do that. Moving into my top starts and sits at the tight end position. My top start, this could be a very sneaky streaming option if you don't really love your tight end on your roster, or if you have your tight end in a bye. I know in one of my leagues, my tight end is on a bye, so I'm going to be streaming this guy. Noah Fant against the Rams. The Rams have allowed the second most points per game against tight ends this year. In their last 4 games, 2 different tight ends have finished over 80 receiving yards. And what I really like is they've given up 3 touchdowns to the tight end position in their last 4 games. So I'm looking for Fant to get you to 40 to 50 plus yards and then get you at least 1 touchdown in this matchup on Sunday. My other top start, this guy has really came along, especially with the injuries to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and he should be able to continue that. Cade Otton against the Chiefs on Monday night. The Chiefs have allowed the 3rd most points per game against tight ends this year. In their last 4 games, they have allowed 2 different tight ends to finish over 55 receiving yards, and then they have only given up 1 tight end touchdown in their last 4 games. But the fact that Cade is basically it seems like he's the top passing option for Baker to turn to when he goes to the air. That's why I also do like Cade on Monday night. And like I talked about, I like Mahomes too this week. This has a potential to be like first team to 30 points wins this game. So I think that's why I also like Otton in your lineups for Monday night. My top sits of the week, I am going to go with Evan Ingram against the Eagles. Obviously, the Jaguars are going to probably be missing. They will be missing Christian Kirk. Probably going to be missing Brian Thomas Jr. So that maybe makes you think, oh, Evan Ingram could have a ceiling type of performance. Well, if you decide to maybe chase that, I would temper your expectations, but I would definitely consider different options, maybe like a Noah Fant this week. With this matchup, the Eagles have allowed the 2nd fewest points per game against tight ends this year. In their last 4 games, the most receiving yards that they allowed to a tight end was 33 receiving yards, which is Josh Wiley. He's I think he's technically the 2nd string tight end for the Titans. So that's not a great sign for you to want to play Ingram. And one interesting factor too is they have not allowed a tight end to score a touchdown against their defense this year. So while he maybe could see more targets this week, I'm still going to stay away from Evan Ingram in my lineups. My other top sit, he will be playing tomorrow night on Thursday night. So if you're thinking about streaming him, because he has been a good option at times, I would maybe consider different options. But I'm sitting Tyler Conklin this week against the Texans. The Texans have allowed the 4th fewest points per game against tight ends this year. Now, only 1 tight end has crossed 40 receiving yards against their defense in the last 4 games. That was Hunter Henry. He got to 41 receiving yards. Now, they have allowed 2 tight end touchdowns in their last 4 games. So if you maybe wanted to take a shot on him, I do feel like Conklin's going to be a touchdown or bust in fantasy lineups this week. So yeah, those are my top starts and sits for week 9 of this NFL season. We're officially going to be at the halfway point. Time to make that push to the playoffs. I wish you guys the best of luck. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like, subscribe button. Follow me on all my social media platforms, whether it's YouTube, TikTok, X, Instagram. And then other than that, I wish you guys the best of luck. I'll talk to you next week for my waiver wires and streamable defenses. Peace out. Talk to you soon.